In 1928, a Pennsylvania man was brutally murdered in his own home. His killers believed he was a witch, using dark magic to curse their families. The case became known as the Hex Hollow Murder, one of the strangest true crime stories in American history. Was this a case of paranoia, or was there really something sinister at work? Welcome to Mystery Trails, where we uncover chilling true crime, baffling disappearances, and unexplained events across the U.S. If you love a good mystery, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with your friends to help us grow. Now, let's start exploring the unknown together and dive on into the story. For generations, York County, Pennsylvania, had lived in the quiet shadow of something ancient, a strange, enduring blend of faith and folklore. The region was home to tight-knit communities of Pennsylvania Dutch farmers, many of whom practiced a tradition known as powwow. It wasn't showy or dramatic, just quiet rituals passed down through families, whispered prayers, hand-drawn charms, and Bible verses twisted together with old Germanic folk magic. For most, powwow was simply a way to keep sickness at bay, bless a newborn, or protect a harvest from rot. It was a comfort, not a danger. A prayer and a poultice, a charm and a cross. But not everyone saw it that way. In some corners of the county, the line between healing and harm began to blur. Belief in hexes and curses, in spirits and shadow work, festered in the minds of those who'd been raised to fear what couldn't be seen. And for one man, that fear became something consuming, something deadly. Because in the autumn of 1928, the quiet hills of York County bore witness to a crime so bizarre, so drenched in superstition, that it would become one of the most chilling and misunderstood murders in American history. A murder born not of hatred, but of belief. It began quietly, the way most curses do. John Blymire, a 31-year-old farmhand from York County, Pennsylvania, found his life unraveling in ways he couldn't explain. His health began to fail. He grew weak, too sick to work the fields. Then his livestock started dying, one after another, with no signs of disease or foul play. The misfortunes piled up until John became convinced that something darker was at work. He believed he had been cursed. Desperate and afraid, he turned to the old traditions, the hidden world of powwow healers, Pennsylvania Dutch folk practitioners who used a mix of prayer, ritual, and herbal magic to ward off evil. But what they told him didn't bring peace. According to them, John wasn't just unlucky. Someone had placed a hex on him. And the one responsible, they said, was a man he had once trusted, Nelson Rehmeyer, a local powwow doctor himself, who lived alone in an old farmhouse deep in the woods. The healers warned that if John wanted to lift the curse, he had to act. He needed to find Rehmeyer's spellbook, take it from the house, and bury it far from the property. If the book couldn't be found, there was another way, a darker one. He was to cut a lock of Rehmeyer's hair and burn it, a ritual meant to sever the power of the curse. But superstition and fear have a way of twisting into something more dangerous. When John Blymire finally confronted Nelson Rehmeyer, what began as a desperate attempt to break a hex turned into a brutal killing, and what followed would shock the nation, a murder fueled not by greed or hatred, but by the terror of old magic, deep-rooted fear, and the belief that the devil himself was hiding in the Pennsylvania woods. The night of November 27th, 1928, was cold and moonless, the kind of night where even the wind seems to hold its breath. But John Blymire wasn't alone when he made his way to the Rehmeyer Hollow farmhouse. He brought with him two others who shared his fear, Wilbert Hess, just 18, and John Curry, barely 14. Boys convinced, like Blymire, that they too had been hexed. They crept through the darkness toward Nelson Rehmeyer's isolated home, hearts pounding with desperation and superstition. When Rehmeyer came to the door, they demanded his spellbook, the one they believed held the source of his dark power. But Rehmeyer was no frail old man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and unafraid. He refused to hand over the book, and the tension quickly turned violent. What happened next unfolded in a frenzy of fear. The three overwhelmed him, beating him savagely before tying him to a chair. Their fear of his supposed powers had turned them into something far more dangerous than cursed men. They were believers willing to kill for relief. But it wasn't enough to take his life. They wanted to destroy his power, to burn it out of him. They doused his body in kerosene, set it alight, and fled into the night, certain that the fire would consume whatever dark magic Rehmeyer had left behind. But that's not what happened. The fire barely spread. The room around him was charred, but his body remained eerily intact, still bound to the chair, face untouched, as if watching. When authorities arrived, what they found chilled them to the bone. Not just a murdered man, but a corpse that seemed undisturbed by death. To Blymire and the others, it was undeniable. Rehmeyer's powers were real. Even in death, he had refused to burn. Word of the so-called Witchcraft murder spread like wildfire, igniting headlines across the country. What happened in that remote Pennsylvania farmhouse wasn't just treated as a brutal crime. It was painted as a battle between man and dark magic. Reporters flocked to York County, feeding a growing frenzy with every strange detail. The killers told anyone who would listen that they had been cursed, manipulated by unseen forces. They spoke of hexes, bad luck, and voices in the dark. Locals, steeped in generations of folk belief, began to whisper their own fears. Some claimed that Rehmeyer's spirit was still lingering, watching from the woods, biding its time. Others believed that the curse hadn't died with him, that it had merely shifted, attaching itself to the very men who had tried to destroy him. But the police had no patience for tales of spells or spirits. They arrested John Blymire, Wilbert Hess, and John Curry within days. The case moved quickly, but not without spectacle. The courtroom became a stage for one of the most bizarre trials in Pennsylvania's history. Witnesses spoke openly of powwow magic, folk healing, and the power of hexes, giving sworn testimony that sounded more like the pages of a grim fairy tale than legal proceedings. In the end, the law had its way. Blymire was sentenced to life in prison. Hess and Curry, both young, were given lighter sentences and eventually released. But outside the courtroom, far from the judgment of the state, the story didn't end. There were still those who believed that Rehmeyer's magic had been real, that the men who had tried to destroy him had only proved his power, not broken it. And long after the farmhouse was boarded up, folks continued to speak his name in hushed tones, careful never to tread too close to Rehmeyer's Hollow, especially after dark. So what really happened that night in Rehmeyer's Hollow? Was it simply a case of superstition spiraling out of control? Or was something far more sinister at work beneath the surface? Some believe the Hex Hollow Murder was nothing more than a tragic descent into mass hysteria, a deadly result of fear passed down through generations. John Blymire had been raised in a world where curses were real, where illness and misfortune could be blamed on the evil eye, a charm, a spell. As his health failed and his life unraveled, he didn't look inward. He looked outward, toward the only explanation that made sense in his world. Someone had hexed him, and when he heard Rehmeyer's name, it gave that fear a face. To some, it was a delusion turned deadly. the human mind trying to make sense of suffering, grasping for control in the shadows. But others aren't so quick to dismiss it as paranoia. There are those who believe the killing was ritualistic, not just a spontaneous act of violence, but a ceremony, carried out step by step with purpose. The strange way Rehmeyer's body was burned, the items removed from the house, the obsession with his spellbook, all of it suggested more than just fear. Some whispered that Blymire may have been involved in something deeper, perhaps a secret group or hidden order that used folk magic as a mask. What if witchcraft wasn't the motive, but the disguise? And then there's the final theory, the one that still chills the bones of those who walk through Rehmeyer's Hollow today. What if the magic was real? The fire that refused to consume his body, stopping short as if held back by some unseen force, was enough to convince many locals that Rehmeyer's spirit had protected him, even in death. After the murder, the killers claimed their misfortunes only worsened. Illness, nightmares, unshakable dread. They believed the curse hadn't been lifted. It had followed them home. Even now, nearly a century later, people still report strange happenings near the ruins of the old farmhouse. Flickering lights with no source, disembodied whispers in the trees, and the feeling, heavy and watching, that you are not alone. So ask yourself, was this just a tale of rural superstition gone too far? Or did John Blymire and his accomplices awaken something that never truly went back to sleep? The Hex Hollow Murder remains one of the most bizarre and chilling true crime cases in American history. A brutal killing not born of greed or revenge, but of fear and belief. It was a crime fueled by whispers of witchcraft, a trial that dragged ancient superstition into the harsh light of a courtroom, and a story that, even now, refuses to fade. It lingers in the mist that clings to the trees, in the crumbling remains of Rehmeyer's house, and in the quiet voices that still speak his name with caution. Did Nelson Rehmeyer truly possess powers beyond understanding? Or was he simply a victim, caught in the crosshairs of paranoia, scapegoated by a man unraveling beneath the weight of his own misfortune? We may never know, but those who live near Hex Hollow will tell you the place hasn't forgotten. Strange things still happen there. The air feels different. The woods never seem still. And sometimes, if you stand too close to where the old farmhouse once stood, you'll feel it, that cold breath on your neck. So if you ever find yourself passing through Hex Hollow, step lightly, because some say the curse was never broken. And what was awakened that night in 1928 still watches from the dark. What do you think? Was this just superstition? Or was Rehmeyer really a powerful healer? Could his spirit still haunt the hollow today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love chilling true crime, eerie unsolved mysteries, and terrifying folklore, be sure to subscribe to Mystery Trails. Every week we explore cases that leave behind more questions than answers. And don't go anywhere just yet. Our next story takes us even deeper into the unknown. Click the next video and I'll see you there. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. That's 11 down, 9 to go. Next up, The Gird in Light, Arkansas ongoing. Let me know if you want me to keep going.